It was my engagement party. Yes, my engagement party. The one that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The one where I got to show off my shiny new ring and bask in the glow of being the centre of attention for once. Except, of course, it wasn't about me at all. Because there she was, my stepsister, Lily, fluttering her eyelashes at my fiancé Ethan, like she was auditioning for the role of homewrecker extraordinaire. And there I was, standing in the corner, clutching a glass of champagne that was probably flat by that point, trying to convince myself that I wasn't about to lose my mind. Now, let me be clear, I'm not the jealous type. Really, I'm not. But when your stepsister is leaning so far into your fiancé's personal space that she might as well be sitting in his lap, it's hard not to feel a little territorial. And Ethan? Oh, he was eating it up, smiling, laughing, doing that thing where he runs his hand through his hair like he's some kind of rom-com heartthrob. Meanwhile, I'm over here, sweating through my dress and wondering if it's too late to fake a sudden illness and leave. But no, I stayed. Because that's what I do. I stay, I endure, I silently seethe while everyone around me acts like everything is fine. And that's when it happened. The moment that changed everything. Or, more accurately, ended everything. I was so focused on glaring at Lily and Ethan, like laser focused to the point where I'm pretty sure I was giving myself a headache, that I didn't notice the rogue food truck barreling toward me. Yes, a food truck, because apparently even my death had to be ridiculous. 1 second, I'm standing there, mentally drafting the scathing text I was going to send to my best friend about how much I hated my life, and the next, I'm airborne. Like, full-on cartoon style, legs flailing in the air airborne. And then, just like that, it was over. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, that's dark. And yeah, it is. But here's the thing, it was also kind of hilarious. Or at least it would have been if it hadn't happened to me. I mean, who gets hit by a food truck at their own engagement party? Me, apparently. Because of course I do. I couldn't just die in some dignified, tragic way, like slipping quietly into the night or something. No, I had to go out in a blaze of glory with a side of tacos. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? The last thing I saw before everything went black was Lily and Ethan, still flirting, completely oblivious to the fact that I was literally dying right in front of them. Like, I was lying there, probably bleeding out on the pavement, and they didn't even notice. If that's not a metaphor for my entire life, I don't know what is. So, yeah, that's how I died. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with the sound of a food truck horn blaring and the taste of cheap champagne still lingering on my lips. And honestly, if I had to go out, I'm kind of glad it was like that. Because at least it was memorable. At least it was me. Tragic, ridiculous, and completely, utterly absurd. Just like everything else in my life. When I opened my eyes, I was convinced I was dreaming. Or maybe hallucinating. Or, more likely, stuck in some weird afterlife where I had to relive my most awkward moments for eternity. Because there I was, lying in my childhood bed, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 12. The same stars that had started peeling off one by one over the years, until they looked less like a galaxy and more like a sad, lopsided constellation. And the smell. Oh God, the smell. That unmistakable mix of lavender air freshener and the faintest hint of mildew that could only mean one thing. I was back in my parents' house. I sat up so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. My hands flew to my face, my hair, my body, as if I needed to confirm that I was actually here, actually alive. And not just alive, but younger. My skin was smoother, my hair was shinier, and my knees didn't make that weird popping sound when I moved. It was like someone had hit the rewind button on my life, and I had no idea how or why. Then it hit me. The calendar on the wall. The one with the cute puppies that I'd begged my mum to buy me, even though it didn't match the rest of the room. The date circled in bright red marker. Lily's adoption day. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just any random day from my past. This was the day. The day my stepsister came into our lives and everything started to go wrong. And now, somehow, I was back here, standing at the edge of a cliff I didn't even know I'd fallen off the first time. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaky and my mind racing. The room was exactly how I remembered it. Messy, with clothes strewn everywhere and half-finished homework piled on the desk. My old stuffed bunny, Mr. Fluffles, was sitting on the windowsill like some kind of silent judge, staring at me with his one remaining eye. I grabbed him, clutching him to my chest like a lifeline, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of second chance? A do-over? Or was it just a cruel joke? A way to rub salt in the wound of my already disastrous life? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had a choice to make. I could either sit here, paralysed by fear and confusion, or I could get up and do something. Anything. Because if this was real, if I was really back at the beginning, then maybe, just maybe, I could change things. I could fix everything that went wrong. I could stop Lily from stealing Ethan, stop myself from getting hit by that stupid food truck, and maybe even stop myself from becoming the bitter, resentful person I'd turned into. But first, I had to face her, Lily, the girl who would eventually become my stepsister, my rival, and the reason my life went off the rails. I didn't know how I was going to do it or what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait for history to repeat itself. So, with a deep breath and a silent prayer to whatever higher power had decided to give me this bizarre second chance, I walked out of my room and into the unknown. And that's when I heard it. The sound of the front door opening, followed by my mom's voice, cheerful and bright, saying, "Welcome home, Lily." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment everything changed. Again. The sound of my mum's voice echoed through the house, pulling me out of my spiralling thoughts. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching Mr. Fluffles like a security blanket, my mind racing faster than my heartbeat. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading, or maybe anticipating, depending on how you looked at it. The moment Lily walked into our lives, officially becoming my stepsister. The moment everything started to unravel. Except this time, I had a chance to do things differently. At least, that's what I told myself as I forced my feet to move toward the living room. When I rounded the corner, there she was. Lily. Smaller than I remembered, with her hair in two neat braids and a shy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was holding a stuffed bear, its fur worn and patchy, like it had been through a war and barely survived. My mum was crouched down next to her, talking in that soft, soothing tone she used when she was trying to make someone feel at home. My dad was hovering nearby, looking awkward but trying his best to seem welcoming. And then there was me, standing in the doorway like an uninvited guest at my own family gathering. For a second, I just stared at her, taking in every detail. The way she fidgeted with the hem of her dress, the way her eyes darted around the room like she was looking for an escape route. She looked so young, so vulnerable. It was hard to reconcile this version of Lily with the one I remembered. The one who had flirted with Ethan, stolen my spotlight, and basically turned my life into a soap opera. But then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe this was my chance to see her as more than just the villain in my story. "Oh, there you are," my mum said, spotting me in the doorway. She waved me over, her smile so bright it could have powered the entire neighbourhood. "Come meet Lily." I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace, and walked over. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Resentment, curiosity, and a tiny, nagging sense of guilt. I knew what Lily would become, but she wasn't that person yet. Not here, not now. And that made everything so much more complicated. "Hi," I said, my voice sounding weirdly high-pitched and unnatural. I'm your new stepsister." Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I wondered if she was as nervous as I was. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her, she said, "Hi." It was such a small, simple word, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some abstract concept anymore. This was real. She was real, and I had no idea what to do with that. My mum, oblivious to the tension, clapped her hands together like she was announcing the start of a grand adventure. "Why don't you show Lily around the house?" she suggested, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm sure she'd love to see her new room." I nodded, because what else could I do? As I led Lily down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into uncharted territory. This wasn't just her new beginning, it was mine too, and I had no idea where it would lead. Befriending Lily was supposed to be the easy part of my plan. Step 1, be nice. Step 2, gain her trust. Step 3, subtly steer her away from Ethan. Simple, right? Wrong. Because the moment I actually tried to talk to her, I realised I had no idea how to befriend someone I already resented. It's like trying to bake a cake when you've only ever burned toast. You know the basics, but the execution is a disaster waiting to happen. I started small, or at least I thought I was starting small. The day after she moved in, I knocked on her bedroom door, holding a plate of cookies like some kind of peace offering. She opened the door just a crack, peeking out at me with those big, wary eyes of hers. For a second, I thought she might slam the door in my face. But then she saw the cookies and hesitated. "I brought snacks," I said, holding up the plate like it was a trophy. "Chocolate chip. My mom made them." She stared at me for what felt like an eternity, before finally opening the door wider and stepping aside to let me in. Her room was still mostly boxes, with only a few things unpacked. Her stuffed bear sitting on the bed, a couple of books on the nightstand, and a framed photo of what I assumed was her old family. I tried not to look at it too closely, but I couldn't help noticing how young she looked in the picture, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. "Thanks," she said quietly, taking a cookie from the plate. She nibbled on it like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to enjoy it, which made me feel weirdly guilty. I hadn't expected her to be so timid. It was hard to reconcile this version of Lily with the confident, flirty girl I remembered. "So," I said, sitting down on the edge of her bed, because standing there awkwardly felt even worse. "How are you liking it here so far?" She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the cookie in her hand. "It's okay." Okay, not exactly a glowing review, but it was a start. I tried to think of something else to say, something that would make her open up, but my mind was blank. What do you even talk about with someone you're technically supposed to hate but are now trying to befriend? The weather, school, the fact that I knew her future and she didn't? Yeah, no. "Do you like movies?" I blurted out because apparently my brain had decided to abandon all logic and go with the first thing that popped into my head. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "I guess." "Cool," I said, nodding like an idiot. "We should watch one sometime. There's this new comedy that just came out. It's supposed to be really funny." She didn't say anything, just kept staring at me like she was trying to figure out if I was serious or just messing with her. I couldn't blame her. If I were in her shoes, I'd probably be suspicious of me too. But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. Over the next few days, I kept trying. I invited her to help me with my homework, even though I didn't need help. I offered to show her around the neighbourhood, even though I hated walking. I even tried to bond with her over music, playing my favourite songs, and asking about hers. But no matter what I did, she kept her guard up, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, one afternoon, something shifted. We were sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but mostly just avoiding each other's eyes, when she suddenly said, "Why are you being so nice to me?" The question caught me off guard, mostly because I didn't have a good answer. I couldn't exactly say, "Oh, I'm just trying to prevent you from stealing my fiancé in the future." So I went with the next best thing. "Because you're my stepsister," I said, hoping I sounded convincing. "And I want us to get along." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue either. Instead, she just nodded and went back to staring at the TV. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time since I'd been thrown back into this mess, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was on the right track. Once I decided that befriending Lily wasn't enough, because, let's be real, being nice to her wasn't going to magically stop her from falling for Ethan, I moved on to step 2 of my master plan, redirecting her attention. The idea was simple. If I could get her interested in someone else, anyone else, then maybe she'd forget all about my fiancé. Easy, right? Wrong. Because apparently, playing matchmaker is a lot harder than it looks in rom-coms. My first attempt was Jake, Ethan's best friend. Jake was tall, good-looking, and had a charm that made him popular with just about everyone. He was also single, which made him the perfect candidate for Operation Distract Lily. I invited him over one afternoon under the guise of hanging out, but really, I was hoping he and Lily would hit it off. When Jake arrived, I made a big show of introducing him to Lily, emphasizing how cool and fun he was. She gave him a polite smile, but that was about it. Jake, to his credit, tried to make conversation, asking her about school and her hobbies, but Lily's responses were short and awkward. It was like watching two people try to speak different languages and failing miserably. By the time Jake left, it was clear that my brilliant plan had flopped. Undeterred, I moved on to plan B, the barista at the coffee shop down the street. His name was Marco, and he had this whole artsy, brooding vibe that I thought might appeal to Lily. I dragged her to the cafe one weekend, insisting that we needed a change of scenery. When we got there, I made sure to sit at the counter where Marco was working, hoping Lily would notice him. And she did, but not in the way I wanted. Marco was busy making latte art, completely oblivious to my not-so-subtle attempts to get his attention. Lily, meanwhile, was more interested in the menu than in him. When he finally came over to take our order, I tried to steer the conversation toward Lily, but she just shrugged and said she'd have whatever I was having. Marco gave me a confused look, and I had to resist the urge to face-palm. Another failure. Plan C was even more desperate. I convinced Lily to come with me to the park, where I'd arranged to accidentally run into my co-worker Greg. Greg was nice enough, if a little boring, but I figured he might be a good match for Lily. As we walked through the park, I kept glancing around, waiting for Greg to show up. When he finally did, I made a big deal about introducing him to Lily, but she barely looked at him. Instead, she spent the whole time staring at the ducks in the pond, like they were the most fascinating creatures she'd ever seen. Greg, sensing that he wasn't wanted, made an excuse to leave, and I was left wondering why I even bothered. By this point, I was starting to feel like I was in one of those ridiculous sitcoms where nothing goes right. Every attempt to redirect Lily's attention ended in disaster, and I was running out of ideas. I even considered setting her up with the family dog, but I wasn't that desperate. Yet. The truth was, I didn't know what Lily wanted. I didn't know what she liked or what kind of person she was interested in. All I knew was that I couldn't let her fall for Ethan. But the more I tried to push her towards someone else, the more I realised how little control I actually had. Lily was her own person, and no amount of scheming on my part was going to change that. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I gave up, not on the plan entirely, but on the idea that I could force her to like someone else. Instead, I decided to focus on being her friend, a real friend, not just someone with an ulterior motive. Maybe, if I could earn her trust, she'd listen to me when I told her the truth about Ethan. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd figure it out on her own. Either way, I was done playing matchmaker, at least for now. When my attempts to redirect Lily's attention failed spectacularly, I realised I needed a new strategy. If I couldn't stop her from falling for Ethan, maybe I could stop Ethan from being the kind of guy she'd fall for. In other words, it was time to expose him for the lying, self-absorbed jerk I knew he was. The only problem? I had no proof. Not yet, anyway. I started small, digging into his past like a detective on a mission. I scrolled through his social media looking for anything incriminating. At first, all I found were the usual posts, pictures of him at the gym, selfies with his dog, and the occasional inspirational quote that he probably didn't even understand. But then, I stumbled across something interesting. A photo of him at a party, surrounded by people I didn't recognise. The caption read, "Living my best life," and the date was just a week before he'd asked me out. That got me thinking. If he was living his best life without me, what else was he hiding? I decided to dig deeper, asking mutual friends casual questions about him. At first, they didn't say much, but then one of them let slip that Ethan had been seeing someone else around the same time we started dating. My stomach dropped. Was I just one of many? The thought made me feel sick, but I pushed it aside. I needed more evidence. Next, I decided to confront him directly. I invited him over for coffee, pretending everything was fine, and casually brought up the party photo. "So, this looks fun," I said, showing him the picture on my phone. "Who are all these people?" He glanced at it and shrugged. "Just some friends from college." "Why?" "No reason," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I just didn't know you were still in touch with them." He gave me a weird look, but didn't say anything. I could tell he was getting suspicious, so I changed the subject. But I wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging, piecing together bits of information like a jigsaw puzzle. I found out he'd lied about his job, exaggerating his role at the company to make himself sound more important. I discovered he'd been borrowing money from friends and never paying them back. And then, the final nail in the coffin. I overheard him talking to Jake about how he was only with me because he thought I'd be easy to manage. That was the moment I snapped. All the doubts, all the suspicions, all the little lies, they all came crashing down on me at once. I confronted him, throwing everything I'd found in his face. At first, he tried to deny it, but when he realised I wasn't backing down, he got defensive. "What's your problem?" he snapped. "Everyone lies a little. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "You've been lying to me this whole time and you think it's not a big deal?" He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he just shrugged and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like an idiot. But as much as it hurt, I knew I'd done the right thing. I'd exposed him for who he really was, and now it was up to Lily to see it too. The problem was, she didn't. When I tried to warn her about Ethan, she brushed me off, accusing me of being jealous and paranoid. "You're just mad because he likes me," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and make her see the truth. But I knew it wouldn't work. She had to figure it out on her own, and as much as it killed me to wait, I knew I had no other choice. All I could do was hope that, when the time came, she'd see Ethan for who he really was, before it was too late. It wasn't until I started spending more time with Lily that I began to see her in a different light. Up until then, she'd been this abstract figure in my mind, the stepsister who'd swooped in and turned my life upside down. But the more I got to know her, the more I realised she wasn't just some one-dimensional villain. She was a person, with her own fears, insecurities, and struggles. And that made everything so much more complicated. It started one rainy afternoon when we were stuck in the house together. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, but mostly just sulking, when she walked in and sat down on the couch across from me. For a while, neither of us said anything. The silence was heavy, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, she broke it. "Why do you hate me so much?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. How could I explain everything without sounding completely insane? I couldn't exactly say, "Oh, I don't hate you. I just know you're going to steal my fiancé in the future." So I went with the next best thing. "I don't hate you," I said, which was mostly true. I don't know. It's complicated. She's nodded like she'd expected that answer. "It's because of Ethan, isn't it?" I froze. How did she know? Had I been that obvious? Before I could respond, she continued. "I can tell you like him. And I get it. He's charming and he pays attention to you, but I don't know. There's something about him that feels off." I stared at her, stunned. This was the last thing I'd expected to hear. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the couch. "I don't know. He just seems fake, like he's always putting on a show. And the way he talks about you sometimes, it's like he doesn't really care. He just says what he thinks you want to hear." I didn't know what to say. All this time, I'd been so focused on trying to protect her from him that I hadn't considered the possibility that she might see through him on her own. And now, hearing her say it out loud, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief because maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't fall for him after all. And guilt because I'd been so quick to judge her, to assume the worst, without ever really trying to understand her. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I shouldn't have assumed. I didn't know." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "It's okay," she said softly. "I get it. You were just trying to protect yourself. I would have done the same thing." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I saw her not as my stepsister or my rival, but as someone who was just trying to navigate her own messy life. Someone who, like me, was doing the best she could with what she had. And in that moment, something shifted between us. The walls I'd built started to crumble, and for the first time, I felt like maybe we could be more than just stepsisters. Maybe we could be friends. But even as that thought crossed my mind, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it wouldn't be enough. Because no matter how much I wanted to believe things could be different this time, I couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan was still out there, still charming, still dangerous. And until I figured out how to deal with him, nothing would ever truly change. Just when I thought things might actually be turning around, Ethan had to go and ruin everything. Again. It was like some twisted version of déjà vu, except this time I wasn't just a bystander. I was right in the middle of it, watching history repeat itself in the most painful way possible. It started with little things. The way he'd linger a little too long when talking to Lily. The way he'd compliment her on things he'd never even noticed about me. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then the text started. I'd catch him smiling at his phone, only to quickly put it away when I walked into the room. When I asked who he was talking to, he'd give me some vague answer and change the subject. It was like I was reliving the worst parts of my past, except this time I had no one to blame but myself. The final straw came one evening when I came home early from work. I wasn't expecting anyone to be there, so when I heard voices coming from the living room, I froze. At first, I thought it was the TV, but then I recognized Ethan's laugh, warm, inviting, and completely fake. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them. Ethan and Lily, sitting on the couch together, their heads bent close like they were sharing a secret. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as a wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness that I couldn't quite put into words. I wanted to scream, to march in there and demand to know what was going on, but I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as Ethan reached out and brushed a strand of hair out of Lily's face, his touch lingering just a little too long. That was it. That was the moment I knew I'd lost, not just Ethan, but Lily too. Because no matter how much I wanted to believe she was different, that she wouldn't fall for his charms, the truth was staring me right in the face, and it hurt more than I ever thought possible. When they finally noticed me standing there, the room went silent. Ethan looked guilty, but only for a second before his usual mask of confidence slipped back into place. Lily, on the other hand, looked like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. For a moment, no one said anything. Then, Ethan broke the silence. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice too casual, too calm. "We were just talking." "Talking," I repeated, my voice flat. "Is that what you call it?" He had the nerve to look offended. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to Lily, who was staring at the floor like it held all the answers. "And you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you call it?" She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said it all. Guilt, shame, regret. It was like looking in a mirror, and I hated it. I hated her. I hated Ethan. But most of all, I hated myself for letting this happen again. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to fix this mess. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, not with them, not with the weight of everything pressing down on me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I left, and as I walked out the door, I couldn't help but wonder if this was how it was always going to be. If no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was always going to end up here, watching the people I cared about betray me in the worst possible way. The tension had been building for weeks, simmering just beneath the surface until it finally boiled over at the most inconvenient time possible. Family dinner. Of course it did. Because why have a quiet, private meltdown when you can have a full-blown dramatic showdown in front of everyone you know? It started innocently enough. We were all sitting around the table, pretending to enjoy my mum's overcooked lasagna, when Ethan decided to drop the bomb. "So," he said, his tone way too casual for what came next, "Lily and I have something to tell you." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth as a cold wave of dread washed over me. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. But that didn't make it any easier to hear. "We're together," he announced like he was proud of himself. Like this was some grand romantic gesture and not the ultimate betrayal. We didn't want to hide it anymore. The room went dead silent. My mum dropped her fork, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. My dad looked like he'd just been told the sky was green. And Lily. She was staring at her plate, her face pale, like she was hoping the ground would open up and swallow her whole. As for me, I felt like I'd been sucker punched. All the anger, the hurt, the betrayal I'd been bottling up came rushing to the surface. And before I could stop myself, I was on my feet. "Are you serious?" I demanded, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You're together? How long has this been going on? A week? A month? Or has this been your little secret the whole time?" Ethan had the nerve to look offended. "It's not like that," he said, his tone defensive. "We didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." "Oh, it just did," I repeated, my voice rising. "Like it just happened to be convenient for you to swoop in and steal my stepsister while I was busy trying to fix my life. How noble of you." Lily finally looked up, her eyes wide and pleading. "It's not like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen, I swear." You didn't mean for it to happen, I shot back, my words sharp and cutting. What? Did you trip and fall into his arms? Or was it more like you saw an opportunity and decided to take it? She flinched, and for a second I felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly drowned out by the anger coursing through me. I turned back to Ethan, who was still sitting there like he hadn't just blown up my entire world. And you, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You've been lying to me this whole time, pretending to care about me, pretending to be someone you're not. And for what? So you could have your little fling with my stepsister? Do you even care about her? Or is this just another game to you? He didn't answer. He just sat there, his jaw clenched, like he was waiting for me to finish so he could defend himself. But I wasn't done. You know what? I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I hope you're happy. I hope you two have a great life together, full of lies and betrayal and whatever else you think love is. Because that's all you're ever going to get. Real love, trust, respect. You don't even know what those words mean. By the time I finished, I was out of breath, my chest heaving and my hands shaking. The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving them all behind. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there. Not with them, not with the mess they'd made of my life. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if this was how it was always going to be. If no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was always going to end up here, alone and broken, while everyone else moved on without me. After the explosion at dinner, I did what any self-respecting person would do. I fled. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a desperate need to get away from the mess I'd left behind. I ended up at a park a few blocks from my house, sitting on a bench under a flickering streetlight, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. At first, all I could feel was anger, white, hot, all-consuming anger that made my chest ache and my hands shake. How could they do this to me? How could Ethan, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd thought I loved, betray me like that? And Lily, my stepsister, the girl I tried so hard to protect. How could she turn around and stab me in the back? It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But as the minutes ticked by and the initial wave of rage began to subside, something else started to creep in. Something quieter, more insidious. Guilt. Not for what I'd said or done, but for what I hadn't. For the way I'd let my fear and insecurity control me. For the way I'd pushed everyone away in my desperate attempt to rewrite the past. And for the first time, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the real problem wasn't Ethan or Lily. Maybe it was me. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent so much time blaming them, so much energy trying to fix everything, that I'd never stopped to consider my own role in all of this. I'd been so focused on controlling the outcome, on making sure history didn't repeat itself, that I'd forgotten to live in the present. I'd been so afraid of getting hurt that I'd pushed away the people who cared about me, leaving myself isolated and alone. And for what? To prove a point? To protect myself from a future that might not even happen? It all seemed so ridiculous now, sitting there in the cold, with nothing but my thoughts for company. I'd been so busy trying to rewrite my story that I'd forgotten to actually live it. And in the process, I'd lost sight of who I was and what I really wanted. I thought about Lily, about the way she'd looked at me during dinner, hurt, confused, and maybe even a little scared. I thought about Ethan, about the way he'd lied and manipulated his way into my life and how I'd let him. And I thought about myself, about the person I'd become in all of this, someone bitter, resentful, and so focused on the past that I couldn't see the future right in front of me. It wasn't a pretty picture, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was seeing things clearly, not through the lens of anger or fear, but for what they really were. And what I saw wasn't just a mess of betrayal and heartbreak. It was a chance to do better, to be better, to let go of the past and start fresh. But letting go wasn't easy. It meant admitting I'd been wrong, that I'd made mistakes. It meant forgiving myself for those mistakes and forgiving the people who'd hurt me, even if they didn't deserve it. And it meant taking a hard look at who I was and who I wanted to be, and then doing the work to bridge that gap. It was a daunting task, and I didn't know where to start. But as I sat there, staring up at the stars, I realised I didn't have to have all the answers right away. All I had to do was take the first step. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ready to do that. Ethan's downfall wasn't something I orchestrated. In fact, I didn't have to lift a finger. His own choices, his own lies, and his own arrogance did all the work for me. It was almost poetic, really, watching the walls he'd built around himself come crashing down one by one, leaving him exposed for the world to see. It started with his job. I'd always known he liked to exaggerate his role at the company, but I didn't realise just how far he'd taken it until I got a call from one of his co-workers. Apparently, Ethan had been caught taking credit for projects he hadn't worked on and lying about his qualifications. When his boss found out, he was fired on the spot. No warning, no second chances. Just gone. At first, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Losing a job is never easy, no matter how much the person might deserve it. But that sympathy quickly faded when I found out the rest of the story. Ethan hadn't just been lying to his boss. He'd been lying to everyone, his friends, his family, even me. He'd built this entire persona, this image of himself as this successful, confident, put-together guy, and it was all a facade. The truth was, he was just as lost and insecure as the rest of us. He just hid it better. But the lies didn't stop there. As more and more people started to see through his act, the cracks began to show. His friends stopped returning his calls. His family started asking questions he couldn't answer. And then there was Lily. Sweet, naive Lily, who'd fallen for his charm and his promises, only to realise too late that they were all empty. I didn't hear from her for a while after everything went down, but when I finally did, it was in the form of a late-night text. "Can we talk?" it read, simple and to the point. I found her at a coffee shop the next day, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping, and there was a sadness in her eyes that made my heart ache. "Hey," I said, sliding into the booth across from her. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "I've been better," she said finally. I didn't know, I didn't know he was like that." I nodded, not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her I'd tried to warn her, that I'd seen through Ethan from the beginning. But I didn't. Instead, I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not the first person he's fooled," I said, "and you won't be the last, but that doesn't mean you're stupid or naive. It just means you trusted someone who didn't deserve it." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she might argue. But then she nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Thanks," she said softly, "for not saying, 'I told you so.'" I smiled back, feeling a strange sense of relief. "Any time." As for Ethan, well, he didn't take his downfall well. He tried to spin it to make himself the victim, but no one was buying it. His lies had caught up to him, and there was no coming back from that. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different city, trying to start over. But I knew better. You can't outrun your past, no matter how far you go. And as much as I wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in his downfall, I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity, because at the end of the day, Ethan wasn't some evil mastermind. He was just a guy who'd made a lot of bad choices and hurt a lot of people along the way. And while that didn't excuse what he'd done, it did make me realise something important. I didn't need him to be the villain in my story. I just needed to let him go. And so, I did. I let go of the anger, the resentment, the need for closure. I let go of Ethan and all the baggage he'd brought into my life. And in doing so, I found something I hadn't realised I'd lost: myself. Letting go of Ethan and the chaos he'd brought into my life was like shedding a weight I didn't even realise I'd been carrying. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But breathing wasn't enough. I needed to move, to do something, to start over. And that's exactly what I did. The first step was leaving. Not in a dramatic, running away from my problems kind of way, but in a deliberate, intentional way. I packed up my things, said goodbye to my family, and moved to a new city. It wasn't easy, leaving behind everything I'd ever known, but it was necessary. I needed a clean slate, a place where I could rebuild myself without the ghosts of my past haunting me at every turn. The new city was everything I needed it to be: bustling, anonymous, and full of possibilities. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, filled it with second-hand furniture, and started the slow, painstaking process of making it feel like home. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Next came the job. I'd always loved writing, but I'd never had the courage to pursue it seriously. This time, I decided to take the leap. I applied for a position at a local magazine, and to my surprise, I got it. It wasn't glamorous. I spent most of my days writing fluff pieces about local events and editing other people's work. But it was a start. And more importantly, it was something I was passionate about. As the weeks turned into months, I began to settle into my new life. I made friends, real friends, not just people I hung out with because it was convenient. I explored the city, finding hidden gems in every corner. And I started to rediscover the things I loved, the things I'd forgotten about in the chaos of my old life. I took up painting again, filling my apartment with canvases that were messy and imperfect, but undeniably mine. I started going to yoga classes, not because I thought they'd fix me, but because they made me feel grounded. And I wrote. Oh, how I wrote. Stories, essays, even a few terrible poems. It didn't matter if they were good. What mattered was that they were mine. But the most important thing I did was forgive myself. For the mistakes I'd made, for the people I'd hurt, for the time I'd wasted trying to control things I couldn't. I realised that I wasn't perfect, and that was okay. What mattered wasn't where I'd been, but where I was going. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the weight of everything I'd left behind felt unbearable. Days when I missed my family, my old friends, even the familiarity of my old life. But those days became fewer and farther between as I built a new life for myself, one step at a time. And then, just when I thought I had everything figured out, I met someone. His name was Alex, and he was nothing like Ethan. He was kind, genuine, and refreshingly honest. We met at a coffee shop, of all places, and hit it off immediately. It wasn't love at first sight. I didn't believe in that anymore. But it was something real, something solid. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let someone in. As I sat there, sipping coffee and laughing at one of Alex's terrible jokes, I realised something important. I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to know where I was going or how I was going to get there. All I needed to do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Just when I thought my life had settled into something resembling normalcy, the universe decided to throw me one last curveball. Because of course it did. Why let me have a clean, drama-free ending when it could toss in a final twist to keep me on my toes? It started with a phone call. I was at work, typing up a fluff piece about a local bakery's new cupcake flavour, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was Lily. We hadn't spoken in months, not since I'd moved away and started my new life. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail and pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity got the better of me and I answered. "Hey," I said, my voice cautious. "What's up?" There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought she'd hung up. Then, finally, she spoke. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's important." I didn't know what to say. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more dramatic than the last. Had something happened to Ethan? Had she gotten herself into some kind of trouble? Or was this just another attempt to rehash the past? Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't ignore it. "Okay," I said finally. "When?" We met at a park halfway between our two cities, a neutral ground where neither of us had any history. When I saw her, I was struck by how different she looked. The shy, uncertain girl I'd known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed older, wiser, and more than a little tired. She looked like she'd been through the ringer, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "Hey," she said, giving me a tentative smile. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, not sure what to say. We sat down on a bench, the silence between us heavy with all the things we hadn't said. Then, finally, she spoke. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind over and over until it finally sank in. "Ethan?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know who else to tell." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage at her for being so stupid, for falling for Ethan's lies all over again. But another part of me, the part that had been through my own share of heartbreak and mistakes, felt nothing but pity. Because I knew what it was like to be lost, to make choices you couldn't take back, to feel like you had no one to turn to. "What are you going to do?" I asked finally, my voice soft. She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I don't know," she said. I needed to tell someone. And I thought of you." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of connection. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite all the hurt and betrayal, we were still family. And family didn't turn their back on each other, no matter how messy things got. "I'm here," I said, reaching out to take her hand. "Whatever you need, I'm here." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still wounds that needed healing, still trust that needed to be rebuilt, but it was a start. And as we sat there, holding hands and staring out at the park, I realised something important. Life wasn't about avoiding the twists and turns. It was about navigating them, about finding your way through the chaos and coming out stronger on the other side. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ready to do that.